Welcome to Podkey Fantasy Football, where today's draft values come with real caveats. A lot of fantasy arguments sound confident right now, but confidence and evidence are not the same thing. The useful edge is figuring out which discounts are real opportunity and which are just injury risk wearing a nicer label. The first thing to pressure test is ADP itself, because ADP is no longer one market. Best ball, dynasty, and one quarterback home leagues are pulling players into very different ranges, and that creates strategy drift if you don't stop and ask what format the price actually came from. Quarterbacks are the clearest example. A cheap best ball stack can be a tournament edge, but in a normal season-long league, forcing a stack can just concentrate variance in one offense for no good reason. Same with RB strategy. Hero RB and Zero RB are both defensible, because the old dead zone framing has shifted. The real point is that the middle tier of backs often gives you weak ceilings and messy workloads, while wide receiver depth in those rounds is usually cleaner. So the practical takeaway is stay flexible. Secure the primary tiers you trust, then prioritize overall flex strength instead of chasing a rigid draft identity. Parker Washington is one of the more interesting discounts because the bull case is not just vibes. There's a real usage argument here: short and intermediate work, YAC ability, and a second-half stretch that actually looked like meaningful per-game PPR production. If that volume holds, a 6th or 7th round cost can absolutely beat its slot. The pushback is simple. Slot efficiency is easier to replace than alpha usage, so if the offense redistributes targets, the floor drops quickly. Ricky Pearsall is more fragile as a projection, but also more explosive relative to cost. The case for him is separation, catch point wins, and evidence that when his targets reach real starter volume, the fantasy scoring follows. At an ADP around 100, you're not paying for ceiling, you're paying for uncertainty around health and role. In that range, that's a reasonable bet, especially in a strong 49ers environment. Jalen Waddle is different because the debate is less about talent and more about translation into a new offense. If the Sean Payton usage projection is right, the fit makes sense. Screens, intermediate work, first down generating routes, and plenty of snaps. The concern is Payton's tendency to distribute touches in ways that can frustrate fantasy managers. Still, the pro-Waddle argument is better supported than the anti-Waddle one, because it rests on route profile and likely volume, not just wish casting. Malik Neighbors is where fantasy players have to separate general ACL optimism from this specific medical file. Yes. Wide receivers often come back close to prior production after ACL surgery. We have enough examples to say a comeback is plausible, not rare. But this isn't just a clean ACL timeline. Multiple knee procedures, including meniscus damage and follow-up scar tissue work, make the early season outlook much murkier. That's why the smartest version of the Neighbors bet is not treating him like a must-start plan in September. He's better viewed as a stash or a mid-season trade target because the upside case remains strong if he returns to anything close to his prior pace, while the availability risk is doing the real damage to ADP. Jonathan Brooks fits a similar bucket in a different way. The receiving skill set gives him value beyond pure handcuff status, especially in a run-leaning camp environment, but health is what determines whether he stays a late-round luxury or becomes a meaningful middle-round pick. Kyle Pitts is one of the trickiest valuation debates because both the optimism and skepticism have substance. The buy case is coherent. Age still works in his favor. Tight ends often develop later than fantasy drafters want, and quarterback plus scheme changes can matter more than people admit. We've seen over and over that tight end production is heavily coaching dependent. Volume, route deployment, and red zone design often matter more than raw athletic profile or old prospect priors. The problem is price. If Pitts is already being drafted as a top 5 tight end in some rooms, part of the breakout is already baked in. So Pitts as a dip buy makes sense only where the market is actually discounting him. If your room is paying full freight, the logic gets weaker because you're absorbing the uncertainty instead of getting paid for it. Coordinator changes and offensive line context are some of the least glamorous but most actionable fantasy signals. Scheme can elevate mediocre line talent. Shanahan-style systems, play-action structure, and strong technique coaching have repeatedly created functional protection and cleaner passing environments without needing 5 stars up front. That's why coordinator upgrades can act like cheat codes for fantasy. When a quarterback gets a better designer and a healthier line, the ceiling can move fast. Kyler Murray is the best example here. If the line is healthier, his passing efficiency has room to rebound while the rushing still gives him weak winning upside. The risk is not hidden. Durability is the whole argument against him, and it's a legitimate one given the injury history and the style of play. Jaden Daniels deserves a stricter version of this scrutiny. The market has moved aggressively on a limited sample, and that's where hype can outrun sustainable floor. On team movement, the Chargers, Saints and Bengals all have plausible line or coaching reasons to improve, while teams like the Packers and Panthers still carry real fragility if personnel breaks wrong. Saquon Barkley's projection is really an argument about environment. If the line and scheme return him to a top-rushing ecosystem, the rebound case is obvious. Yards before contact and long-run touchdown potential are exactly the kinds of things that can swing back with better blocking. But there are trade-offs. Zone transition questions, offensive line health, age creeping upward, and prior workload interruptions all make an early second-round price less comfortable than the name value suggests. David Montgomery has a different problem. His ADP has climbed into a range where touchdown dependence starts to matter more. If Woody Marks really earns a meaningful receiving role and the split gets anywhere near 60-40, Montgomery can still be useful without really paying off the price. Basil Tutin is the upside swing in this group. The profile says explosive efficiency and breakaway ability, but fantasy managers should be careful not to confuse beat report enthusiasm with confirmed volume. A 1A or 1B path is plausible. A locked-in featured role is not yet established. That's exactly the kind of gap where draft rooms can get overconfident. The 49ers are a good reminder that a strong fantasy environment and structural fragility can both be true. The scoring ecosystem still looks strong enough to support bets on secondary pieces like Pearsall, and Brock Purdy benefits from that same balance. But this roster also depends on several stars with real injury histories or accumulating wear. And once one key piece falls out, the effects can cascade faster than projections usually admit. That same balancing act applies across the board to ADP misvaluations. Some players are discounted for reasons that look too severe. Others are expensive because the market has already told the best version of the story. The edge is not winning every argument. It's knowing when the market is paying you to take uncertainty and when it's asking you to ignore it. That's it for this episode of Podkey Fantasy Football. Keep the upside, keep the context, and don't let one ADP screen do all your thinking. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.